The NFL draft is in 1 week for the Indianapolis Colts and the rest of the league. So, what scenarios can play out for Indianapolis in round one? Will they trade up? Will they trade back? Will they stay put? Anything's possible. Now, what do you, the fans, want to see Chris Ballard do on April 24th? Well, let's talk about it. Welcome to the Horseshoe Huddle Podcast, presented as always by Indianapolis Colts on SI.com. My name is Drake Wally, deputy editor for the site and co-host of the show. And then, of course, I'm joined by Noah Gebert, analyst on the site and fellow co-host of the show. Noah, we are finally closing in on this thing. We already covered offense. We already covered defense. Now it's time, before we do our final mock draft next Monday, it's time to just kind of talk about scenarios that'll play out. There could be some simple ones. There could be some wild ones. How you doing, man? And how does it feel to know that after all of this coverage, we're finally 7 days away from this thing?
Yeah, I'm good. Good. I'm excited for the live show that we'll be doing on Thursday night in round one of the draft, just to interact with everybody. I liked how last year that was just kind of a casual sit back with everybody. Everybody's kind of hanging around waiting for the Colts to pick. I know 10 minutes on the clock for each pick seems like a long time, and that's going to drag out when you're sitting there at pick 14. That's 140 minutes we're going to be sitting in there at least waiting to see what happens with that selection. So I'm excited about that, and yeah, excited about this episode. I think we're deep enough into draft season that all these scenarios have kind of like, we're kind of in a rut. I feel like everybody's kind of leaning one way and going one way. It's always Tyler Warren at 14, Colston Loveland at 14, all that kind of stuff. So I think this is going to be a fun episode to kind of expand what we think might be possible and cover our bases. I know a lot of Colts media wasn't really expecting the Latu pick. He's somebody that nobody really expected to fall to pick 13 when they were on the clock. So this is a good exercise for us to go over and see what names could possibly be there due to a potential fall or whatever, or just somebody that we're totally not seeing coming for the Colts.
Yeah, and this is, again, we've hashed this over and over, but you have to with the draft, is that they need so much still. They need depth pretty much anywhere you can name. They need a starting tight end. They need a potential starting right guard. If they decide to take Matt Gonsalves and make him the heir of Braden Smith, there's just so many things that the Colts can still do with this pick. But before we get into it, let's go ahead and address the chat here. So NFL Nerd says, how about a second rounder? Not too wild, but definitely unexpected. I mean, Chris Ballard loves his trade backs, and he's also one of those guys, if he doesn't like something, he might just get out of it. So, Truett, $2 super sticker. Thank you so much. Cheers to you, my friend. As always, loyal viewer, loyal listener, just an absolute OG. Don, what's up, guys? Good to see you here. Chet, how's it going, folks? It's going good. We're finally on the cusp of finishing this thing. And then, of course, Tony Pelletieri says, what's up? Hey, everybody. We are excited that you are here. So this episode is going to be very similar to our mock draft next week and the actual draft on Thursday. Yep. And it's just super laid back, people. This is going to be something where it's more conversational. We're going to come up with just different scenarios. We've got, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4. We've got 4 scenarios basically that can just encapsulate the entire episode. So this first one is pretty controversial because it takes a very clear game plan to do this in the NFL draft. And we're just going to dive right into it. And that's trade up scenarios. So, like we said, this isn't really anything that we have definitive picks on. What we're going to do is we're going to kind of have a conversation about it. And people in the chat, put what you think potential trade up scenarios for the Indianapolis Colts could be. One that is a little bit maybe not talked about. Everyone talks about a certain player, and we'll get to him. Everybody talks about a certain player the Colts should trade up to get.
Yeah.
But another one that I think that they might trade up to get because tight end is so unbelievably needed and it's so barren and it was awful last season is there's a chance that they trade up to get a guy like Colston Loveland. I don't see how it could. I mean, it's definitely one of the wild scenarios, but let's just hypothetically say, Tyler Warren's gone. I mean, there's been mock drafts that have had him as soon as number 5 overall, and that would be to the Jacksonville Jaguars. So what are your thoughts on this? I mean, do you think that Indianapolis, dare I say, needs tight end on a detrimental level where if Warren is gone, they might trade up to get a guy like Colston Loveland because look, if Tyler Warren's taken at 5th or 7th to the Jets, that means Colston Loveland could be pretty
Yeah.
quick behind him. So what are your thoughts on that? Do you think it's absolutely crazy, or do you think the tight end was bad enough that they could do it?
I mean, I think it's a wild one in the sense that nobody's really talking about that. But I think you put out on Twitter or X earlier today, I think, and I mentioned this in this past episode that I mean, if Tyler Warren and Colston Loveland are both there, I don't think either of us would be upset if the Colts went with Colston Loveland. I don't think that's necessarily how the Colts are thinking. I think they would probably prefer Tyler Warren over Colston Loveland, but I didn't. There's a chance that they don't, right? There's a chance that Colston Loveland is their guy. Maybe if they get a little bit antsy and they do see Tyler Warren come off the board, everybody knows how big of a need that tight end is for the Colts. I think it's telegraphed through the media, through the fan base, through casual NFL watchers, and especially through the front offices of other teams in the draft. So if the Colts feel like they desperately need a tight end, they know that everybody else around the league knows that they want a tight end, they might feel compelled to make a move to get their guy because, like we've mentioned, this is a do or die year for this regime. They need to get somebody in a difference maker at a position of need. And yeah, tight end, I think you get Colston Loveland or Tyler Warren, they fill in a spot immediately, come in and be productive, and really kind of elevate that offense. I think Shane Steichen would be drooling over that. I'm not sure he's necessarily considering the pros and cons of having future draft picks in upcoming years. And I don't think that Chris Ballard's really in a position to worry about that either. So maybe that is a situation where they jump up. Yeah, you mentioned Tyler Warren going 5, 7, anything like that. And the Colts are sitting there around 10 and 11. They're getting antsy. Maybe they make a call to Chicago or the 49ers there at those spots and see if they can get their guy for cheap.
Yeah, and if you look at the teams that are kind of close to where the Colts are, you got the Cowboys, like Noah said, you do have the Saints, you do have the Bears at number 10, and then anything past that, you're really asking for some serious draft capital, or you're asking for something that's going to cost quite a bit. But I think that you have to analyze, really have to analyze the what happened with this position last year. Okay, while none of these guys were stars, you had 4 at least capable tight ends that could not even eclipse 40 catches as a quad. That is absolutely embarrassing. I have seen this stat over and over. I've wrote it over and over, and it is just disgusting. And especially when you consider that Kylan Granson led the squad in catches and in yards, and he didn't even eclipse 20 catches and didn't even eclipse 200 receiving yards. So this is a position that absolutely cannot go untouched, and I think that you have to do it. I mean, I dare say you almost have to do it in the first round. So not the craziest scenario. Now we do have to touch on the other side of things, which might warrant something, like a trade up, but we'll get to Yim here. If Warren makes it past 7, you think they'll trade with Carolina? Okay, so let me look at the order here. If he makes it past 7, do you think they'll trade with Carolina? I think if there was a player that they would do it for, it would be Tyler Warren.
Yeah.
And again, it's because they had such a garbage room last season. They had nothing as far as receiving. So I think that if you're going to get that quote unquote potential generational tight end, because look, he's not the prospect Brock Bowers was. Okay, you have to say that. And the Colts did try to get Brock Bowers last season.
Malik Neighbors, Roma Dunze, those I think were all guys that the Colts were willing to be aggressive and jump up for. So, I mean, and they didn't really add any offensive playmakers in that draft that they feel good about. I know you got A.D. Mitchell in the second round, but based on the production you saw in his rookie season, I feel like you still need some more offensive firepower. They didn't go out in free agency and add anything on the offensive side of the ball either in terms of firepower. So, yeah, offensive weapon was something that they were definitely keen on moving up for and trying to be aggressive, so I wouldn't see why it would be any different this year.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, there is the possibility that if they really feel like Tyler Warren can be a massive, massive game changer, they'll trade up. Okay, and now we'll actually get to that. This is a more realistic situation, okay, is that if Tyler Warren does fall, let's say that he falls all the way, let's see. Okay, so the Colts are 14th. Let's just say that he gets past the Saints. He gets past the Bears. He gets past the the 49ers, I think at that point the Colts are just sitting there. They're like, okay, we're kind of out of the teams that really need a tight end. And those teams are the following. Because look, the Titans are getting a quarterback, the Browns are probably getting a quarterback, the Giants are probably getting a quarterback. Okay, all three of those teams are probably going to get quarterbacks, or if they don't need a tight end necessarily. The Patriots, they could really use a lot of different things. But I mean, if you look at these first three teams, this is off of PFF. The needs are QB, QB, and QB at the top. All right. So the Patriots need a running back. The Jags, they could use a tight end. So that's the first team. If it gets past them, the next team is definitely the Jets. Now they also need an offensive tackle badly. That's one of the reasons I don't think the Jets are going to take Warren. But then, of course, you do get to the Panthers, and they could really use a tight end. Let's be honest. Bryce Young needs all the freaking weapons he can get. I think that he had a nice little turnaround in 2024. But if he gets past, I think if he gets past the Jets and the Colts really, really feel like Tyler Warren's a game changer, and they're sitting there looking at the Panthers like, they're going to pick him. What do you think the odds are that they're going to give up capital for a tight end? Because while we're talking about wild scenarios, while that could happen, trading up people, especially when it's more than like 3 or 4 spots, it just costs so much in the first round. And then also for a tight end, a position that some teams make it work without a dominant guy.
Yeah.
The Colts kind of proved they can't. What do you think the odds of this happening are? Let's say he's with Carolina's on the clock. What do you think the odds are? Ballard says, here's a package for you.
Yeah, so I think this is a totally different conversation than we would be having if we did this time last year. Just because I think the way that the tone has gone for this offseason with Chris Ballard has been about being aggressive and getting their guy, targeting Cam Bynum early, targeting Charvarius Ward early in free agency, and doing what it takes to seal that deal. Maybe that's going to bleed over into the draft also. I know the draft has always been a little bit more conservative for Chris Ballard in terms of more often than not trading back, collecting picks, getting more shots at the board. But I mean, if they've clearly identified a guy, then if there was ever a season for them to be aggressive and move up, it's definitely this season.
Yeah, and at DSG, I'm going to go ahead and get to this real quick. Be careful. You might get blacklisted on X if you put this out there. I think Loveland fits the Colts more than Warren just based off play styles. Hey, buddy, I agree to a heavy extent. I think that Warren is so damn good. But yeah, Colston Loveland, as far as pure unadulterated offensive like receiver, playmaker, passing weapon, I do think he fits their offense better. So, but yeah. I think that if when we get down to it, if the Colts if they want to run 11 personnel, okay, they want one guy that they can put in line, they can put in the slot, and they can put him on the outside. They might even be able to use him as a running back on goal line situations, use him as a fullback. It's going to be difficult for them not to try to go up and get this guy. Now, here's the thing. When they were trying to get Brock Bowers, I think that they were looking more like a couple spots ahead. Of course, with Malik Neighbors, you would have probably been talking about more, to get him, because I think he was selected, I think in the top 5?
I think it was 5.
Yeah. I mean, the Colts were 15 last year. To jump up 10 spots, they would have had to give up a lot, and clearly it wasn't enough. So we'll have to see. I think that's not a bad scenario. Super Pony, we'll get to your chat here in just a second. One last one. Do you think that the Colts could trade up to get a defender?
So I was
if so, who?
Yeah, I was kind of racking my brain here and just trying to think of other names on here. I know some people will notice I threw Armand Mimbu on the thumbnail there, and that's all about Chris Ballard being in the trenches there. I think that's somewhere you'd pick. Yeah, you'd be pushing, like, if he falls 9 or 10, and you're in love with that guy, maybe you make the move there. That's the kind of guy that I think he doesn't really fit your typical like size requirements for tackle, but by all accounts, most people view him as a tackle regardless. So I think that's awesome in terms of where the Colts' current situation is on the offensive line with Braden Smith and Matt Gonsalves, and kind of what's up in the air there, where you don't know if Matt Gonsalves is going to cut it in there at right guard. You want to give him the shot, obviously, but you don't know if that's going to be the long-term solution. And then Braden Smith's on a contract year, so you don't know if that's going to be the long-term solution at right tackle. So you've got both of those spots up in the air. Why not go up, be aggressive, and get a guy that you really like? Maybe that's Armand Mimbu. I know he's got the RAS score that the Colts love. even if he doesn't have that strict tackle size. But that's somebody you can try out there at right tackle, and if he doesn't work at right tackle, you also have room for him at right guard. I think that'd be a fun move to make. And then as far as on the defensive side of the ball, it's kind of hard to identify a name that they would want to trade up for. I mean, obviously Abdul Carter, but you're not trading up from 14 up to 2 or whatever it'll take to get Abdul Carter. I don't know. I mean, there's a lot of names. Jahad Campbell's somebody that I'm sure they would like, but I'm not. That's not somebody you're going to have to trade up for. And I don't think that. I mean, with that injury and what's on the line this year, I don't think you give up extra draft capital to get a guy who might not play for the first 2 months of the season. As far as corners go, maybe I mean Will Johnson we've talked about, but he doesn't have. I feel like if it's a trade up for a guy, it has to check literally every box that they have.
Exactly.
Tyler Warren does that. I think Colston Loveland does that. It's hard to find people on the defensive side of the ball that wouldn't be too far of a move up to go get. Maybe a defensive tackle. We mentioned Derek Harmon on the episode on Monday. I don't know if that's somebody you move up for or if that's somebody you just hope falls to you at your pick. Yeah, it's hard to find a defensive name that I think they would do it for.
Yeah, and look, we gotta address Super Pony's chat here, or Super Chat. Super Pony's Super Chat. I need Jahad Campbell really badly. So the only reason I don't look, let's say that he doesn't have that torn labrum, right? Let's say that he's not walking around at Alabama's pro day with a freaking sling on his arm. I think that he's a complete football player. Okay. He literally is a multi-role linebacker in a top 10 prospect type of presentation. Okay. So that would be awesome. But there's concern because you're not going to get him until like week 5, week 6, maybe. And Lou Anarumo, that defense, not to say Jahad Campbell's not a smart young man, right? Not a talented as hell defender, but Lou Anarumo's scheme is brutal to learn. That's why veterans have had a better time with it than young guys. Okay. And that's one thing you can knock Lou for. Hopefully he's come to the Indianapolis Colts with a different game plan to help younger players because they're full of them. All right, you got Nick Cross, you got Jalen Carlisle, you got Leatu Latu. Those are just a few. So he's going to have to do something different this time to help those guys get integrated into his defense. But, man, Jahad Campbell, one hell of a football player. Whoever gets him, I think he could honestly fall to the Colts at 14, though.
Yeah, I think he could. I like him a lot. I think there's so much on the line this year that even if he is available week 1, we don't know how that injury recovery is going to go. He's still missing all of his rookie mini camp, his rookie training camp. And that's just, it's tough to come in and be a contributor or a solid contributor as a rookie when you don't have all those practice reps in the preseason. You're just taking those mental reps. So, I mean, when you need a guy to come in and step up and be a plus player immediately at this pick, it's a little bit risky to take that chance on Jahad Campbell, even though I think he could be down the line. If Chris Ballard had been let go, Shane Steichen had been let go, this was an entirely new regime, I would feel completely different about the Jahad Campbell pick. I think you would then have time to get a guy like that and see how he develops. But with the Colts' current situation, I don't see that as a trade-up option. And at 14, I would personally like it and I would approve of it, but I do think it's kind of risky.
Well, and hey, at the end of the day, if they trade up, I mean, they are sure of it. They did it last year. Yeah, they did it last year with Matt Gonsalves. Okay, they did it with Jonathan Taylor. All right. I truly believe Matt Gonsalves before he got hurt, he was a top 50 prospect. Okay, Jonathan Taylor turned into basically the Colts' blunt force object for their offense. I mean, when the Colts trade up to get somebody, it makes sense. Everyone was crapping on him for Nick Cross. Nick Cross went out last year and basically silenced a lot of doubters. Now, like Noah's mentioned, can do it again. We'll see. But I think when the Colts trade up, they are very convicted in it. They feel like it's a legit thing. We'll see. I think at the end of the day, we're both going to answer this. They trade up. Who do you think they trade up for? Your prediction.
Yeah, I think it would be Tyler Warren. I think that's the most likely solution there, the most likely answer there. Just a guy that checks all the boxes and fills a huge positional need, and a position that they, by all accounts, tried to move up for in the past. It just seems like it makes too much sense And I know the title of this episode is Wild Draft Scenarios, and by all accounts, that's not a wild draft scenario. I think that's what a lot of Colts fans are like genuinely expecting to happen. But in terms of a trade up, that's really the only name that I see that makes sense.
Yeah, and I agree with you. I think that that is the one that fits, and the reason that I say that isn't because I feel like they would do it. I feel like they're the kind of team that they'll just sit there. They'll be like,
Yeah.
all right, cool. Let's just sit here. Look, they wanted Brock Bowers. They wanted Malik Neighbors. When they realized they couldn't get those guys, they just sat there. They waited for best player available, and it was basically Leatu Latu. Not one defender had been taken at that point. So you had access to every single defender you could get, and they picked who they felt was the best pass rusher. I still think Leatu Latu is a technical monster.
Mhm.
So we'll see what happens with him. But yes, I think if they do anything, it's going to be trade up to get Tyler Warren. I just realized, my goodness, I have had I've had Super Ponies chat up for a while. Um, did I? Okay, I thought that I missed Yim for a second. There was a comment I wanted to get. Yes, Jake Lawson. Thank you so much for joining. Before we move on, since we're talking about tight ends, is the difference between Loveland and Mason Taylor, or Elijah Arroyo? Yeah, Elijah Arroyo, really worth not taking one of the defenders? I don't think so. I think that Taylor and Arroyo's explosive. Okay, he's an explosive tight end. I think that Mason Taylor is more of your Jack Doyle type of tight end. He'll probably catch like 50, maybe 60 passes in a season, which, look, if he catches 50 passes, let's say the Colts take him, that's 11 more than the four guys that played last year. So, I mean, you're going to take that and be pretty freaking happy with it. Those are like Dallas Goedert numbers, 50, 60 catches. People forget that, hey, Brock Bowers and guys like that catching, 70, 80, 90 balls, Travis Kelce. It's really rare for tight ends to catch more than like 60 passes. Okay. Like you're in a really good company if you're doing that. But I think that Loveland, if we're talking about him as opposed to those two, he's superior. I mean, I'm a huge Loveland lover over here. I think that he would fit the offense better than Tyler Warren from a pure offensive weapon perspective. But I think that you're talking about Tyler Warren and Colston Loveland, people, is not far behind him. He just isn't. But then after that, yes, you still have some depth. But I think that after that, you're talking about a couple first rounders as opposed to a second rounder and potentially even a third or fourth rounder. What are your thoughts on this one? I just had to get to that because Jake that's a good question.
Yeah, I think the gap's big, and I think the gap between
Yeah, it is.
Taylor and Arroyo is big in and of itself. I think you've got the clear top three guys, but I don't think that it's necessarily. It's hard to hit on a tight end in round one, if history has taught us anything. And I think you can find guys later in the draft that can come in and be solid contributors, but also you find guys later in the draft that end up being what Will Mallory has been for the first 2 years of his career. Which, I mean, you still have hope for him, but it's not like that's setting anything on fire or giving you any production that you feel good about or making you feel like you've found the guy. So I mean, I like the defenders quite a bit more than I do the tight ends. I like Warren and Loveland, but I do think that it's a little bit safer to go with a defender that you've evaluated and feel good about. And it makes it so hard because of the state of the depth chart currently and how nobody's there at the tight end position. But yeah, you do have options after the draft. I think you have a good option maybe in the third round, a guy like Terrence Ferguson. I would like to explore. I think that'd be cool. I think he'd be a good fit. He fits all the measurables that you look for in a Chris Ballard type tight end. So there's options later on in the draft. Thomas Fedoni out of Nebraska, I like him as well. He'd be a day 3 pick. But again, are these guys that are going to come in and step up and be impact starters on day 1? I don't know if that's true. So if that's really what you're looking to come away with in the draft as an impact starter at tight end on day 1, then I think you have to go with one of the top 3 and just kind of take your lumps with the guys you're missing out on.
Yeah, and look, when it's all said and done, I know that we've mentioned this. I know that you just have to kind of say it over and over again. They had, I believe, the worst tight end room. Okay, so it's going to take a lot. We'll see, but I do believe if they trade it up, it's probably going to be for a guy like Tyler Warren. So We're already 24 minutes in. I didn't even realize that because we just got so pumped up about this here. Damn it, we are really really we're almost halfway through this. Okay, so this one is let me see here. So this is if they stay put at 14. Okay, so it says surprising selections. Okay, but what it actually is it's three different tiers, and we're going to start off with the biggest shock. That's what we'll start off with. They sit at 14. Okay, let's say that the board falls where both, we'll start with both tight ends are off the board, which I think if both tight ends are off the board, somebody might have reached a little bit if they're off the board by 14. What do you think would be just not even the biggest shock, but just an absolute like shocker to you that they would take? Which one would make you go, wow?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of names on here, and there's like different reasons that they could be shocking. And it could be because, wow, we didn't think this guy would go this high. We didn't think the Colts would be interested. Or it could be, wow, we thought this guy was going to go top 10, and he ended up falling to 14. So it's really hard to think about. And then I think this just kind of bleeds into that next topic that we have on here of just names that we're not thinking about for 14. I think all of these could be big shocks. So I'm just gonna throw one name out here that I think would be the biggest shock, like in the realm of possibility for the Colts. And I'll say man, I don't know who I want to go with here because I don't want to do anything too outlandish that you're absolutely going to be like, that's not going to happen. There's no way they would pick Shedeur Sanders at 14 if he picks that or if he falls there. So I'm not going to say something like that. But okay, I'm going to go with Jalen Walker, the edge rusher slash linebacker out of Georgia. And I think it's a big shock just because I think his stock has kind of fallen recently. He's kind of a tweener. You don't really know where to put him, but he's a high IQ kind of player. His dad was a defensive coordinator, so he just understands the game really well. And I think you can rely on that to get him into the defense in some sort of way. I don't think you necessarily want him to be a full-time edge. I don't think he has the length for it. I think he's just going to be kind of like an effort rusher, and he's going to just kind of try to push through with power, more so than with all these technical pass rush moves that Latu was billed as having coming out. But they also need an off-ball linebacker, and I think he could fill that spot there at the will, being a kind of run and hit linebacker. So yeah, I think he's a name that I feel like has completely fallen off. And like early on in the process, he was talked about as this top 15 guy. And the Colts maybe could have considered him, but he's hovering right around 20 to 25 now. I don't think many people are talking about him. All the hype's on Jahad Campbell, but with that injury that we brought up and how he might not be available, maybe you go with another tweener type of guy in Jalen Walker, who you know will be available day one.
Yeah, that's a good one. And I mean, hey, the hype behind Jalen Walker is very similar to the hype behind Shamar Stewart. You look at the college production, okay, and it's not sexy. All right, it's not like, wow, look at what this guy did. He had 12.5 sacks in 3 seasons with a season high of 6.5. All right, he had 89 total tackles with a season high of 60. All right, and 56 of those were solo. You're betting on and I know Patrick Rye loves this word so much because of Anthony Richardson, and he's clearly a huge Anthony Richardson fan. Potential. You are going with the potential here, and it isn't the quarterback type of potential. You're going with a simpler position, even though no position's easy in football or the NFL. But Jalen Walker is a guy that I think that you could turn into just a weapon on defense. I think what would potentially be even more shocking, Patrick, we'll get to your super chat here in a second, would be if they took someone one of two positions. If they took defensive interior, let's hypothetically say that a guy like Walter Nolan falls. Okay, they pick him. That would be crazy. But would it really? Because both DeForest Buckner and Grover Stewart are going to be over the age of 30, right? They are over the age of 30. Neville Gallimore is sure as hell not your solution past those two guys. He's a depth dude. Okay. That's really not something that would shock me if they took a defensive tackle. Now, one that would blow my mind because he's the 13th ranked prospect. That's Mike Green.
Yeah.
That's somebody that there's been some concerns about his character, but my gosh, did he absolutely hammer the Senior Bowl. He looked great that whole week. He looked dominant. he was dominant at Marshall. I know that didn't play exactly the the cat's meow of all these competitive teams and all these high level squads. But Mike Green is a guy to keep your eye on. And then God forbid if they took a guy like Will Johnson,
Mhm.
like at 14, they sit there and they say, you know what else we could use? We could use a cornerback. So those are all very interesting names. We got to get to Patrick's chat here. All right. I'd rather have an elite defender in the first to get lose defense as close to top 5 as possible. Colts are run first anyway. Get a pass catching
Mhm.
tight end later. Noah, what are your thoughts on that right there?
I feel the same way. I don't think the Colts necessarily feel the same way. Uh, I think tight ends are generally easier to find than impact players on the defensive side
They
of the
are.
ball.
Yeah.
I mentioned a guy like Terrence Ferguson I like in the third, who's going to be more of your pass catcher than your blocker. I think he can kind of do it all, but he was more effective as a pass catcher than he was as a run blocker. So that's a name you could go with, and then you could focus on those first two picks being on the defensive side of the ball or the offensive line. I know a lot of Colts fans would hate that investment early on the offensive line, but I think, yeah, you could go defense 1 and 2, get a guy we mentioned like Jalen Walker, Mike Green if he falls, some of this fun stuff, and then focus on another position and on the second round, and then finally get to tight end. I think you'd be leaving a lot of Colts fans in distress, especially after round 1. You don't get a tight end. You're still sitting there with those question marks on the roster. You get a night to sleep on it. You're like, okay, they'll get Mason Taylor round 2. They'll get somebody else. Round 2 comes and they still don't pick a tight end. I think you're going to have almost a riot on your hands. So yeah, I mean it definitely makes it a little bit risky when you're not addressing a need that you have so largely on the roster. But the Colts have kind of put themselves in that situation. I feel like they do every year. They put themselves in this situation where they pigeonhole themselves into needing to pick a certain position early, and they do it every time. So I do expect a tight end to be taken pretty early.
Yeah, and again, I think that the defense definitely could use more firepower. I think that when you consider where they're at with a brand new coordinator, that could be something that you see. I mean, we'll have to just kind of see how it plays out because 14th is an interesting position to be at in the first round. So the next one is names we're not thinking about. So I think this might be kind of similar to Biggest Shock, but some names that we're really not thinking about, and I want to go back to it actually, is Walter Nolan. So I know that he
Mhm.
is, I believe he's the 8th ranked prospect. Yes, so he's 8th ranked. But the thing about Walter Nolan is if this man falls, okay, people haven't really been talking about if the Colts would just take him if they're sitting there. Look, if the Colts are considering Walter Nolan at 14, Colston Loveland, Tyler Warren, they're probably off the board. Guy like Shamar Stewart, probably off the board. Guy like, dare I even say Mike Green. This is if Nolan falls.
Mhm.
That's somebody that I really feel like no one's talking about. No one's really considering it. The guy had 4.0 sacks in 23, 6.5 in 24. He had 48 total tackles in 2024, 3 passes defended. He was an All-American. This is a dude that would probably be in there rotating in more than Neville Gallimore,
Mhm.
despite the fact he's a rookie. Is there a name that you think people aren't talking about enough? There's one that I was thinking about regarding the offensive line, if I'm not going to lie, that played for Missouri that I really don't think would be too bad if the Colts picked him at 14.
Yeah. Well, I think Walter Nolan's a big. I think some people expect him to go earlier. He is the 8th ranked prospect, but average draft position on the at least on the simulator is around 20. So he's generally available for the Colts at 14. We'll see kind of how that plays out in real life. I know there's a lot of disagreement in terms of how to rank those interior defenders. Mason Graham, Kenneth Grant, Walter Nolan, Derek Harmon. All these guys are kind of interchangeable depending on who you're asking. So yeah, he should absolutely be somebody that you're talking about. I think he's disruptive on the interior, and I think his highlights are as good as anybody's in the draft class. I think he's a little bit inconsistent, but yeah, I mean, I think that's somebody that could be an impact player at a position of need. It's hard to kind of imagine how much he would get into the lineup in year 1, which makes you kind of doubt that a little bit that they'd be willing to go interior defensive line in round 1. Because you feel like they just need a huge impact early on. But I think, yeah, Walter Nolan's a huge name. And I think if you're looking further down the board at some of these people that the Colts might select at 14, because we've talked about this a lot, how this might not be a year where too many teams are trying to trade up just because the talent is so it's pretty even. Like you get out of the top five, and then it's kind of even until you get into the middle of round two. So all these guys are kind of pretty level. So it's going to be hard to find a team that wants to give up valuable assets to move up and get a guy that they have ranked similarly to some other guys on their board. So the Colts might be forced to sit there at 14 without anybody that they feel is necessarily a ton higher on their board than other people. So you've got all these names that kind of run together. There's names on the offensive line, someone like Josh Simmons at tackle out of Ohio State. We mentioned Donovan Ezra, who's been a name that's going on. I think
Yeah.
people are finally starting to talk about him as an edge that might be a possibility if they're sitting there. I saw Patrick mention Gray Zabel. I think he was listed in a mock early at pick number 14, and I think a lot of people would say that's pretty early for somebody like Gray Zabel, but by all accounts can play all five spots on the offensive line, and really the Colts kind of need that. Like they can need somebody who can play on the interior and the exterior while they're in flux with their current situation on the offensive line. So yeah, I think all those are good names to consider.
Yeah, I gotta get to these comments real quick. Wyatt, does anybody have faith in Jelani Woods? Chet says no. Super Pony says no. And Horseshoe Huddle also said no. Oh my goodness, no. Look, this is a situation where I think that there could be a lot of different ways the Colts could go. I think one that people have talked a lot about, but I don't know if they're taking it serious, is Armand Membu.
Mm-hmm.
Baller, just a baller. He played 800 snaps at tackle, but you can move him inside. That's the thing. You can move the guy inside, and I just don't think that you're going to miss. I don't think he's going to miss too much. I think that he's going to be able to make that transition, but we'll have to see. We'll very briefly touch on this one. They stay at 14. Ideal scenario, go.
It's Tyler Warren again. I think this is like the trade up scenario. Tyler Warren, Colston Loveland, somebody that kind of checks all those boxes, fills an immediate need, the biggest hole on your roster. I think most people would say. So I think that's the ideal thing, and I think it's hard to tell if that's even likely at this point. There's so many mocks with Tyler Warren going earlier than the Colts. But then you just have to think it's a round one tight end. How much are people willing to give up for that? I know Brock Bowers was kind of the exception to the rule last year. But maybe Tyler Warren is seen a little bit differently throughout NFL teams and how much they're willing to give for a guy who doesn't necessarily have the highest ceiling, but has a really, really high floor.
Yeah, and just to rehash this, the Jaguars, okay, the Jaguars. So the three teams that everybody's been mocking him to, including the Bears, who they have freaking Cole Kmet, okay, who actually has turned into a pretty good tight end, if you ask me. But you got the Jags, you got the Jets, and you got the Panthers. Those are the teams everyone's like, well, they might take Tyler Warren. The most realistic one is the Jags. They lost Evan Ingram. Okay, the Jets need offensive line help, and the Panthers, I think they need more wide receiver. Okay, so we'll have to see, but I can't see the Jaguars saying, you know what, let's use a fifth overall pick on a tight end. I just can't see it. I can't see it. Maybe they're seeing it. They seem like at times a very weird organization the way they do things. So who knows? They might see him as legitimately a top 5 pick. It would definitely be one of the highest picks I've ever seen for a tight end. I'll tell you that. So, so those are kind of like if they stick at 14. This next one is gonna load the chat with comments, and that's trade back scenarios. So Indianapolis is sitting at 14. They get there. They're like, you know what? None of these guys are really, none of the guys on our board at this point are even here anymore. Where do you think that they might? How, like, you've got two things here. How far are they willing to go, and what players might they target? So I think they'd be willing to go probably to the early 20s, because at that point, and you mentioned this so like profoundly in our last episode, is that the gap between 20 and 60 overall gets slimmer. It gets smaller. So where do you think that they might be willing to go if they were to trade back? Because it's one of those situations where if you go too far back, you might miss somebody that could really help your offense or defense.
Yeah, I mean, it depends how they all have these guys tiered. I think this, like I mentioned, this is a unique year where everybody's kind of conflicted on how far apart really these guys are from 15 to 35, 15 to 50, if you want to go back that far. I think it's not out of the realm of possibility for them to trade out of the first entirely and move back into the second round and pick up some more picks that way. I think you have to trade back a little bit more than you would normally to get the return that you would expect to get in a normal year, just because there's going to be less suitors trying to move up. And you kind of hope that the Colts get lucky and have somebody fall that they're really not targeting. Maybe no team's willing to pull the trigger on Shadur Sanders. He falls to 14 and the team's trying to trade up and get a guy like that and willing to give up something. Maybe Shadur's long gone by 14 and the team really likes one of Jackson Dart. There's not a lot of other names that I would really consider, but somebody like really desperate to get up there, somebody from the early second round, trying to move up and get a quarterback. Maybe you consider moving back that far just because of the returns you're going to get on that is going to be a little bit better than if you're trading back from 14 to 21, and you still might get a guy who you would value a little bit similarly.
Yeah, and hey, if they end up trading completely out of the first round, I really think that they're going to pick Mason Taylor. I do. That's just my opinion.
That makes a lot of sense.
I think that if you can recoup that, right, you can get an early second rounder and still sit, I believe it's 45th. Am I crazy? Are they 45th? I think they're 45th. I think so. Regardless, the Colts are about in the mid-second round. If you can get yourself the tight end that you feel like can at least do something, right? Because look, this is just honesty. Any one of these guys from Elijah Arroyo ahead, they're going to start right away. Mm-hmm. All right. Like if Jelani Woods somehow, by the magic of God, can get through all of these injuries, then you might be talking about the most athletic tight end. I don't think he's going to be the starter. So if you can trade back out of the first round and get yourself another second round pick, get your tight end and then still address defense or offensive line or whatever, that's awesome. There's one scenario that I really like, and that is if the Colts, and this is because he is the 28th ranked pick, and that is if they traded back and they got Gray's Abel. Mm-hmm. I would love that. I think if they were able to even trade back and get a guy like Colston Loveland somehow, that would be huge. If they were able to trade back and get a guy like a James Pierce Jr., who is strictly a pass rusher, not going to help you much in the run defense game. These are scenarios that could happen. Of course, then there's also Trey Amos. If they really think that they could use a cornerback, they might trade back into the early second round or late first round, pick up their cornerback, still be able to get 2 picks in the second round. We'll see. But I think that a trade back scenario, let's just say this, I think it's far more realistic than a trade up. I think that Chris Ballard is the kind of guy that if he's sitting there and he literally does not like anything he sees, he's not just going to be like, you know what, let's go with the best player available. No. He's way too smart for that. I know that, say what you want about Ballard. I know he's been mediocre as hell as a GM with his win-loss record and playoff appearances and quarterbacks. I mean, it's just been a mess. But this guy does really well in the draft. He understands the draft. He's a former scout. He teaches other guys how to be scouts. So people have learned from this guy on how to evaluate the draft in the combine. So I think that he is not just going to sit there and just take a guy. So what are your thoughts on that? Like, let's just hypothetically say that, really just Tyler Warren and Colston Loveland are off the board. Do you think that he trades back?
I think, man, you got to find the partner first. And I think there's always going to be somebody that's probably willing to do it. It's just a question of if it's worth it to you or not to move back. And this year, I think it's probably less likely to be worth it than it would be in other years. But yeah, I think, that would definitely be on the table. And he's going to explore that every time. And he's going to answer every phone call and take all that seriously. So if he gets an offer, he moves back. I think a couple of names that I would like to see, we mentioned Derek Harmon at the top. Tyler Booker, Donovan Jackson. Funny, I keep mentioning trench guys for that. It's just kind of how I picture that going with a trade back. Yeah, I think they're willing to go further down in the first round. By all accounts, everything that Ballard's ever really said is if they don't see a guy that they're willing to be aggressive and go up and get, and nobody really falls to you, falls right in your lap like you weren't expecting, then he's always going to be open to those trade backs. So you just got to hope that there's somebody willing to tango there.
Well, I really like this comment from Paul Wilson. This is a 7-win team.
Mm-hmm.
First off, before we even continue, they win 7 games, Paul. Ballard's gone. Steichen's gone. Richardson is officially a bust. Daniel Jones ain't the guy. There's a lot of things that have to be asked if they win 7 games. So first off, I think that this current setup is torn down to the studs. All right. I think they need that first round pick for impact. Trading back doesn't move the needle enough. It's not a great draft to trade back. Profound there, Paul, because when you do look at some of these, I mean, if you're talking about true second rounders, guys like Mason Taylor, guys like Carson Swessinger, guys like that makes sense, right? You just wait.
Mm-hmm.
But when you're talking about the needs, it's like, does Mason Taylor move the needle enough at tight end? Does, a guy like Elijah Arroyo, if you wait till round 3 or 4 to pick up a tight end, does that really give you what you need? Is it much better than a guy like, I don't know, Jelani Woods if he's healthy? We saw Jelani make some stupid good plays when he was healthy. So this is really an interesting comment because this draft is loaded with certain positional talent. But overall, I don't know. Do you think that it's a draft where if you're the Colts and you're sitting almost dead in the middle of the first round, do you think that they should just be like, you know what? I mean, what are we going to get? Yeah. What are we going to get here? Their asses are on fire. Most of those guys, they have such a hot seat right now. Those 3 I mentioned especially. So what are your thoughts on that comment? Because I think that's a pretty good comment.
Yeah, no, I agree with pretty much all of what Paul said there. I agree. Currently, this is looking like a 7-win team or thereabouts. I think they need an impact. The problem that I have with that is I don't know that that's necessarily going to be there at 14. I don't think that the guy that you're picking at 14 is necessarily going to be any more likely to be a huge impact guy than a guy you would pick at 34, 35 or whatever early in the second round if you do end up trading back. So yeah, it's not a great draft to trade back in terms of the compensation that you're going to get. It's probably not going to be what you would get in other years, but I also would argue it's not a great draft to be picking 14. If all those difference makers are gone and you're sitting there and you just kind of have your pick of the best of what's left, I think it's kind of falling back and taking somebody else that's going to be in that same tier that you would have drafted anyways is a sound move to make.
Yeah, I mean, and you know what? Just because it's so absolutely ridiculous, I'm going to go ahead and put Patrick's comment up. It's a little bit dark, but I'm going to do it. Richardson won't be a bust. He will tear his ACL in camp, and Daniel Jones will lead the Colts to an AFC South title and 11 wins. Then everyone next year will say maybe AR is still the guy because he was just hurt. I mean, the hope here, Patrick, is that it brings out the best in Anthony Richardson. Now, I will say, I don't know. Hopefully to God that doesn't happen. But when you're talking about 15 games out of 34 with just constant injuries, that's the biggest question mark about Richardson. It's not his accuracy. It's not, can you fix that? It's not, can you fix the propensity to turn the ball over? It's not, can you fix the propensity to lower your shoulder and kill everyone when you're running? It's, can he even stay on the field? That's the biggest question. So Anthony Richardson, as Chris Ballard said, he hasn't proven he can play 17 games.
Yeah.
So he's got to do that before he can do anything else because he can make all the improvements, turn into the best QB in the NFL. If he can't play, none of that crap matters. So, all right, we're going to get to the back end of this here. So what we think will happen. Okay. So many. Now I actually have to think about this because me and Noah purposefully didn't really.
Yeah, we'll talk our way through it.
Much.
I mean, I'm sure we've got plenty of viewers in here that are being talkative, and they're going to want to tell us what they think is going to happen. I'm interested to hear what they're going to say. I don't necessarily want to cheat off their answers. I do have the concepts of a plan.
Okay.
Most of my idea. I don't know if the name is there.
You like the concept.
So I'll just say off the top, like the beginning of how I think it'll play out. I think Tyler Warren is likely gone when the Colts pick at 14. It's just looking more and more likely like that's going to be the case. I don't think that Colston Loveland is going to be the pick if he's there. So I think we're probably already looking at a name that's going to be a little bit surprising. And I think it's going to be a guy on the trenches, either on offense or defense. So I'll start there. I guess that'll depend on who's available at that point, and I'll come up with a name here eventually. I do want to see some other people in the comments, see what they're saying. If Warren's gone, Loveland is not the pick. It's somebody in the trenches. Throw out some names for me to cheat off you guys.
Yeah, so Patrick says, want to happen or think will happen. So we're going with what we think will happen. I like what you said there. Look, at the end of the day, you have to ask yourself, as Noah ponders up what his grand scheme is, what is best for Anthony Richardson and or Daniel Jones? Is it a tight end or is it protection? That's what you really have to ask yourself. And then you got to ask yourself on the other side of the ball, this is a team that lacked pressure on the quarterback. Now, Buckner was hurt. Samson Ebukam didn't play. 2023, those were your top two pressure guys. Okay? So if they're both healthy, maybe you've got that back, but you can't take a chance on a guy like Buckner who has taken a lot of wear and tear in his career, and a guy like Ebukam who literally ripped his Achilles. Okay, who the heck knows what that guy's going to be like? You're hoping that once it's completely strong again, that he's going to bounce back because he was one of the best free agent signings of 2023, just simply put. You do need more juice on the defensive line, okay? You can pick up depth for safety, depth for corner. You can pick up a good linebacker in round 2. Okay, I still am convinced the Colts are picking Carson Schlesinger. So this is a situation where I do think, and it's going to break my heart to say this, I think that a guy like Loveland might be gone by the time the Colts pick. I do think Tyler Warren's going to be gone. And I think that the team that's going to bite on him are the Jacksonville Jaguars. I really do. I know, but my God, Trevor Lawrence needs a middle of the field target. I think that they're going to bite on him real early. I think that they're going to take him at an absurd spot because it's the Jags. And I do also think that Colston Loveland might go to a team that nobody is expecting. And I'm just going to go ahead and throw out a prediction here. Let's see. Okay. I think he's going to the Bears, and here's why. I think that you have a more complete tight end in Cole Kmet. I think that you could get yourself a move tight end. You could have 2 tight end sets for the Bears. You could have yourself an offensive weapon and a guy who's more of, like we said, that complete tight end. That's a wild card selection. But I think if both those guys are gone, I think that they're going with an offensive guard. I really do. I think that they're going with a guy like Armand Membu. And it's because I do think that they are going to have Matt Gonsalves continue to be that swing tackle. And it's one player. One player is the reason why. And that's Blake Freeland. If one of those guys goes down, you move Gonsalves inside. Okay. Blake Freeland, he ain't it. He just is not it. Okay. I know he didn't really play. I don't think he played at all last year, but you saw the epic struggles of he's a huge, long, tall guy that just got absolutely dominated. Just dominated by, yes, the league's best, sure, and guys like Trey Hendrickson, and I think he even had to face off against Aaron Donald. But look, it does not matter. He was steps and steps and steps and steps behind those guys. So I don't think you can be confident in that. I think that you need to replace Will Fries. Will Fries was an animal in the pass game, in the run game. He hit his star stride in 2024. That's why he got such an absolutely absurd contract for a guard, So I think that that's a position the Colts would say, you know what, we really need to help our quarterback. And it's the interior offensive line, which really helps your ground attack. I don't care what Richardson becomes. Currently, your number one weapon and the guy that helps you move that freaking pigskin is Jonathan Taylor. It's number 28. You can't short the guard position and throw a guy like with the talent level of Dalton Tucker in there, or Danny Pinter in there, or Mark Glowinski. I know that he's a free agent, but you can't do that. You have to get a guy. You have to get somebody you feel like you might be able to develop. That's a scenario where I'm like, if the tight ends are gone, I'm right there with you. I could see them addressing the trenches on at least one side of the football. I think offensive, though, because you got to protect your quarterback.
Yeah, I think Mimbu, if he's there, I think the Colts would like to select him. I would like to see the Colts select him. I think he'll probably be gone there. And I think
my gosh.
I think that your next best lineman might be a little bit worse than your next best defensive lineman when you're considering that. So I think ideally they would want to add direct help for Anthony Richardson. If you're not willing to take Colston Loveland because of the injury or whatever, Tyler Warren's gone, Armand Mimbu's gone, then I think you might just be in a situation where you have to take somebody on the defensive line. So I'm going to say edge is probably a bigger need, and I'm eyeing Donovan Ezeraku here, but I think Derek Harmon is more likely. Okay. So I'm going to go with Derek Harmon, defensive tackle out of Oregon, which I think a lot of people would be really upset about.
Well, and the thing is, they would be upset about it, but you have to read the situation. I mean, with how dominant DeForest Buckner and Grover Stewart are, there's not many teams that have a duo of that magnitude for your left and right defensive tackle. They got to rotate out at some point. They're also both over 30 years old. I've said that over and over. At some point you have to replace those guys. And are you gonna sit there and wait for free agency? I don't think you can do that. I think you need to do it now. That's not crazy. I also think that it's not crazy that they take an edge rusher again. Yeah. They're obsessed with edge rushers, and I do think if they're really anticipating Ebicom returning, Latu hitting his stride, and Kwity Paye continuing to be a run defender, that a guy that can give you a floor of 8 sacks. Why not give yourself another edge defender? Why not continue to put pressure on quarterbacks? That's how you win in the NFL on defense. It all starts in the trenches. I know that's boring to say. It's also true. All right. Like if you don't get any pressure on quarterbacks in the NFL, you could be Daniel Jones sitting back there just picking apart a defense. All right. You saw it sometimes with the Colts, guys like Drake May. They were able to pick apart a defense. It was also the soft coverage, but there wasn't exactly firepower getting to him in the trenches. You lose Dio Dangbo, who led the team in pressures. He might not be this sexy defender, but he was a powerhouse. So losing him was big in many ways. So I think that at the end of the day, that's not a bad pick. I think that what will actually happen, though, and this isn't even me being biased, I think my gut tells me that Warren is going to be gone by the time they pick. I don't think, even if he's sitting at 12, that they're going to trade up to get him. I don't think the Colts are going to trade up to get a tight end. I think that they're going to pick Colston Loveland. I think if I had to put my money down, which I did, I actually bet that they will pick a tight end in round 1 because one of these two guys is going to be available, and it's not going to be Warren. Okay? I just cannot envision. A wild scenario, maybe Loveland goes to the Bears. Maybe for some crazy freaking reason, the Jets are like, you know what, we got to have a tight end, and Warren's gone at 5, and they get Colston Loveland. Trust me, there's been some mocks where both these dudes are gone by the time the Colts pick. They're gone by the 10th pick, which is wild. I think it's going to be Colston Loveland. I think the Colts are going to look at this situation. They're going to say, we have an offensive weapon here. By the way, Colston Loveland's closer to Brock Bowers than Tyler Warren is to Brock Bowers. Mm-hmm. So I think Colston Loveland can also be, once he gets some weight on him, I think Andrew mentioned this on the Bleacher Report, that if he gets into an NFL weight training program, he could put on the muscle needed to be at least a halfway competent blocker. You don't have to be this George Kittle type blocker, Jack Doyle type blocker. You don't have to do that. You just need to be able to get the job done. Guess what? They re-signed Mo Alley-Cox. That's your blocker. Drew Ogletree might be their best blocker. I know you want one tight end. If you don't get Tyler Warren, it's going to be difficult to find that guy. So I think it's going to be Colston Loveland because I think, like you mentioned, man, I just don't see Tyler Warren being there. Someone's gonna shoot for him.
Yeah, I definitely think Colston Loveland will be available at 14. Um, and it makes a lot of sense for them to go with him because it seems like he fits. There's just nobody talking about him. Maybe that's just the Colts front office being really good about keeping things under their hat and being tight-lipped about stuff. They have been in the past when we haven't seen some things coming. So he very well could be the pick. I just think we've been tight end since the end of the season. And we knew the draft slot and we knew Tyler Warren was coming out. Tight end's been like the entire conversation. I think that's too easy of a pick. I think it's got to be something else just by virtue of everyone's been talking about that.
Patrick does make a really good point here that, you don't think that they don't have top level weight programs. I do. I just think that there could be a different presentation to actually put some more weight on him because he is a slender tight end. And I do think that if he just puts on a little bit more weight on an NFL level, I think that that's going to help him. Now, again, he's never going to be this phenomenal inline guy. The best thing about Colston Loveland is you're going to use him in different ways. You're going to move him around the field. You're going to be able to. I just personally think, as far as a receiving offensive weapon at tight end, I think that he is a more effective guy than Tyler Warren. Now, if we're talking pure move him inside, blocking, all that stuff, goal line, hand the ball off to him. Yeah, I think Tyler Warren might be your guy, which, like you mentioned, Patrick, they're more of a run-first team. We'll have to see. Paul Wilson, we're going to go ahead and wrap up the show with this great super chat. How many teams ahead of us need a first-round tight end? So we kind of hashed this out. But just to hit it again.
Need is kind of strong for any of these teams, I would say. Needing a first-round tight end is rare. But there's definitely some threats that could take one or both of those guys.
I think that I was going to say the Saints, but they did re-sign Juwan Johnson. The Jaguars desperately need a tight end. They need one. But like I said, they're fifth. I would not be surprised if they reached. I would not be blown away at all if they pick Warren. The Jets need a tight end, but they really need a wide receiver, tackle more than anything. Yeah. The Panthers could use a tight end, but they also need a wide receiver more than a tight end. They need to continue adding to that wide receiver group. And then the 49ers, they've got George Kittle. The Cowboys have Jake Ferguson. I believe the Dolphins, I think they have Jonnu Smith. They did have Jonnu Smith. So they're a team that might want somebody in the first round.
He is with the Dolphins still.
Yeah, so they still need more. They need more on their on their offensive line for Tua, defensive interior. So I think the biggest bets are the Jaguars, the Jets, and the Panthers. Those are the three that really stick out the most. Now, hey, the Bears, again, they might look at the situation with Caleb Williams and say we need to give him more big mismatch type targets. But those are the teams that stick out to me. What do you think, Noah?
Yeah, I think you hit it on the head there. Like you said, it's hard to predict. First-round tight ends are always so unpredictable. You don't really want to be the team that's picking a tight end 5th overall, and everybody says, "Wow, that's a reach," because I think you're already up against it, trying to force a pick that early. Jaguars have done things like that, trying to force picks early before, so I wouldn't be surprised if they're the team that does it. Jets, Panthers, and then could be somebody that trades up. There's not going to be a ton of options, there's not a lot of people that there are worth trading up for. But in a class with so few high end talents, getting somebody who you feel really secure about and has a really, really high floor could be enticing to some of the teams picking later. So there could be a trade up also. So you have to consider some of the teams that are back behind the Colts.
Very fair. Well, you know what? We do have a Colts news and rumors, but it's just basically that Jonathan Taylor is going to be announcing the day 2 picks, and he was a day 2 pick. So that's pretty much the only piece of Colts news and rumors. But there was a comment we will address before we give our parting comments here. NFL Nerd. Yes. So next Thursday we're going to have definitely Andrew's going to be on. We might have a couple other people. Maybe there will be a Stats Matt cameo. We'll have to see, but we're going to try to get a couple people on there because we've been debating. You just never know what will happen in the first round. So we'll. I think that more than likely we might stick around for the whole thing, but we'll also have to see because that that draft, you almost, if you're doing this like me and Noah, you almost have to take the next freaking day off your day job.
There's definitely going to be some guests making appearances because we don't want to talk for 320 straight minutes. So we'll need the chat to do some heavy lifting in there, and we'll need the guest appearances to do some of the conversing as well, so we don't lose our voices before the Colts even make their selection.
And I'm going to need to slow down on my beers, okay? Because otherwise I'm going to be slurring my words by the time the Colts pick 14th overall. So anyway, that's our show, everybody. Thank you so much. You guys are the absolute best, as always. Don't forget to like the Horseshoe Huddle on Facebook. Follow Indianapolis Colts on SI. On X, we are at Colts _SI. Subscribe to Horseshoe Huddle on YouTube and click that bell to turn on the notifications. And hey, guess what? If you want to listen to the Horseshoe Huddle podcast, no worries at all. Subscribe to us on Apple, Spotify, wherever else you listen to podcasts. So guys, we are finally in the closing week of this thing. It has been so freaking long, and so many times you've had to cover mock draft this, talk about Tyler Warren that. I don't see them picking Tyler Warren. It's going to be somebody that I'm right there with Noah. I wonder if it's going to be somebody the Colts fans are just like, boo, and they start throwing stuff at the TV. But thank you so much. We will have our final mock draft on Monday. We'll have the live presentation on Thursday. Everybody enjoy the final 7 days before the NFL draft. Do all of your mock simulators, and we will be seeing you here yet again on Monday night for our final one of the offseason. See you then.